Combat sports, and jiu-jitsu included, can be a bit unusual, where most athletes start their careers super active, competing almost on a monthly basis if they can manage to stay healthy. But after a while, as you win more and more, the stakes get higher and the big names become a lot more picky with the fights that they choose to take. But lately, the events seem to be few and far between, and many of the best jiu-jitsu competitors that competed at the ADCC Championships 8 months ago have not had a grappling match since. But it's safe to say, when ADCC rolls around again, these fighters will throw themselves back into the mix and jump on the horse to fight for the top title in grappling. But today, I don't want to look at the guys who might be holding off because of injuries or just waiting for a good fight. I want to look at 3 guys who are at the very highest level of jiu-jitsu in the world and just disappeared. Guys like Erberth Santos, who rose to stardom as one of the biggest and best upcoming black belts in the world before getting suspended for starting a fight, obtaining a drug addiction, and going from competing close to 100 times a year down to just 4 times. Erberth Santos grew up in Boa Vista, Brazil, getting into trouble at school and on the streets from a very young age. The toughness he developed from getting in fights drove him to jiu-jitsu success after being introduced at just 9 years old. Although his mother tried keeping him from training because of his bad grades in school, the potential he showed at local tournaments in his area garnered attention from big name coaches that would go to Erberth's house and convince her to let him train. Eventually, Erberth was invited to the bigger gyms in Brazil and started competing on the international stage, building a second home base at Team Lloyd Irvin in Baltimore, Maryland. And all this exposure did leaps and bounds for Erberth's game, where he quickly became an elite colored belt, winning both gi and no-gi world championship at brown belt, as well as a South American, Pan American, and a Brazilian national championships, all in 2014, where he was pretty unanimously agreed to be the #1 brown belt in the world and the hottest prospect going into his black belt. And Erberth's success didn't stop at brown belt. He got better and better in his first year at black belt in 2015, where he competed almost 100 times and went up against legends of the sport like Andre Galvao, Marcus Almeida Buchecha, Bernardo Faria, and Felipe Pena. He would end up losing to all these legends that year, but would go on to beat every single one of them the very next year in 2016, well, except for Buchecha, but it's Buchecha. And by 2017, he had achieved the biggest title in the sport, a black belt world championship. Erberth was a freak at 6'2", 230 pounds. He competed at super heavyweight and never shied away from the absolute division, even though he was going up against the best era of heavyweight grapplers that has ever existed. With his fast-paced and powerful blitz passing, Erberth made these Goliaths look human from the time he was just 23 years old. And in 2018, he continued this path of destruction, competing about 30 more times and capping the year off with a flawless sweep at the Abu Dhabi Grand Slam. But then, things took a turn for the worst. In 2019, Erberth only had 13 matches, which is less than half than what he had the previous year, and close to 7 times less than what he had in 2017. But what's even worse is that Erberth's troubled past had caught up with him. In January, Erberth crashed his brand new motorcycle, leaving him with an injured elbow that kept him out of training leading into his first match of the year. Erberth would also face off in a super fight against one of his rivals, Felipe Pena. And early in the match, Erberth had injured his knee from a Pena sweep attempt. While on injury break and being examined by the doctor, frustration sunk in and Erberth dashed into the crowd to attack a member of Felipe's camp before an all-out brawl ensued between members of both teams and the fighters. In the chaos, members of the crowd were hurt and both fighters ate some good shots, including kicks to the ribs that Erberth received after falling to the ground in the pile-up. It was reported that Erberth was lunging across the stage to charge at Felipe's brother, who was calling him soft from the crowd, and probably some more vulgar terms. Erberth also claims that Felipe's camp had been mocking him and hurling racist insults earlier that day, and that this was just a tipping point in a long-building feud. Regardless of who started the brawl, this was a low point to start the year for Erberth and earned Erberth a 1-year suspension from the IBJJF because of his behavior. He would later find out that he had unexpectedly become a father that year with a woman he wasn't close to, and financially was struggling to afford his apartment, so he had to move to a favela. Things just got darker and darker for Erberth as he started training less and less, and to cope, he began smoking weed all day long, to a point where he would have 10 joints a day, leading him to fall into a dark depression. To boot, he was pretty much blacklisted from most competitions that year, and the few times he did compete were pretty inconsistent performances that aren't up to his usual standard, including a loss in the semi-final at the Abu Dhabi World Pro, where a 24-pound weight cut caused him to be hospitalized with dehydration. But 2020 began the turn of a new leaf for Erberth. In terms of his mental health, he began working with a psychologist and went back to his original jiu-jitsu team. But the trend of him competing less and less continued. He only had 12 matches with 10 wins on the year, 10 matches with 7 wins in 2021, and only 4 matches with 2 wins in 2022, where he made his return to the IBJJF World Championship, losing his first match to Rafael Lovato Jr. And now, almost a year later, that was the last time we saw him, and it's really unsure what's next for Erberth. He recently had elbow surgery to remove some cartilage buildup and promises to work on physical therapy and come back strong, but it's clear that the now 29-year-old's body has changed drastically, and the lack of consistency in both training and competition is clearly a huge hill to climb for the once hottest black belt in the world. But I'd still expect to see Erberth Santos back a lot sooner than Keenan Cornelius, who's pretty much transitioned to a full-time jiu-jitsu businessman and social media influencer as opposed to an athlete. Keenan grew up in Hawaii, where his stepfather drove him to start learning jiu-jitsu at their local gym when he was just 14 years old in 2006, which just happened to be the home of the first ever American Jiu-Jitsu world champion BJ Penn. Keenan quickly gained some success, winning local tournaments, teaching classes at the gym, and even doing private lessons in Hawaii before wanting to take the sport more seriously. He ended up dropping out of college to go pro and moved to Baltimore, Maryland to join Team Lloyd Irvin, where his growth increased exponentially and he went on a complete tear. Keenan won the European, Pan American, World and No-Gi World Championships in 2012 as a purple belt and repeated the same thing the following year as a brown belt to become the biggest American celebrity of his generation. Before even receiving his black belt, the USA had full hope in their new jiu-jitsu prodigy and poster child, who would be their best chance for a future black belt world title. And to make it even sweeter, Keenan regularly won both his weight class and the absolute division at these IBJJF major events, so the pressure was on him to become the first ever American-born absolute world champion, a feat only ever achieved by Brazilian competitors. Surely with all the success he had coming up as a color belt, Keenan would be a shoo-in to repeat this at black, right? After his incredible campaign in 2013, a scandal hit Team Lloyd Irvin where members of the team were accused of gang sexual assault, and Master Lloyd Irvin himself was named as a culprit from the victim. In an effort to avoid the negative media attention from the case, Keenan, along with some other big-name competitors at the gym, left to start anew. Keenan would end up at Atos Jiu-Jitsu under legendary professor Andre Galvao, who ended up promoting Keenan to black belt at the end of 2013. And for a while, Keenan was striving, coming in third in his weight class at the absolute division at ADCC in 2013, winning a No-Gi World Championship in 2014, winning major after major and open after open. But every time he got close to the big one, the Gi World Championship, he fell short. And in 2019, Keenan's career came to a crossroads. After many personality conflicts with Andre Galvao and one last final dispute where Keenan supposedly showed up late to class, the two parted ways right before Keenan was preparing for his world camp, which meant he'd now be going into it without a gym behind him. Keenan actually represented Globetrotters Jiu-Jitsu at the event, which meant he was pretty much a nomad, training here and there at a few different places, but was truly on his own. With the pain still fresh from losing in the semifinals the previous year, Keenan felt this would be his last chance to go for the world title, as his unique lapel guard style was starting to be figured out by his opponents on the world stage, and his physicality was changing as he started to approach his 30s. His youth would no longer be an advantage in the absolute divisions with the bigger, younger talents entering the scene. And the tournament got off to a rocky start for Keenan, losing out of the gates in his heavyweight division. But his tunnel vision was focused on the absolute division, where he had to leave everything on the mat. In his first match, Keenan came out strong, dominating Arnaldo Maidana and finishing him with a collar choke. In round 2, Keenan pulled off the impossible, beating the surging young Nicholas Marigali, who had won his weight division that year and was coming off a double gold performance at Brasileiros. So Keenan was looking in really good form at Worlds and had now made it to the semifinals for the second year in a row. He had pulled Leandro Lo, an opponent he had faced many times in the past but rarely ever beaten. And for maybe his last chance at the world's top title, Keenan fell short, losing on points once again. In 2020, Keenan's year started and pretty well ended with a silver at the European Championship because of the pandemic killing his competition momentum essentially for good. The pandemic may have ended Keenan's competitive career, but it birthed something that might be his best accomplishment to date. Keenan put on his business hat and broke ground, building an impressive new project called Legion American Jiu-Jitsu, a massive state-of-the-art jiu-jitsu gym in San Diego where Keenan found his true calling as a head professor and teacher. With a new facility and all the time in the world while competition was gone due to COVID-19, Keenan took to YouTube, creating weekly jiu-jitsu content that was exactly what people needed while they couldn't train. He also started Jiu-Jitsu X, a website dedicated to high-quality jiu-jitsu instructionals from some of the biggest names in the the game, and Keenan seems to be in a really good place. He's successful in business ventures, steadily pumping out great content, and has a growing group of high-level competitors coming out of his team. But it seems now that at 31 years old, his competition days are behind him. His last appearance was a loss at Pans in 2022, his first match in 27 months, and he hasn't said a peep about coming back since then. The internet has seen videos of him lately and rumored that he looks out of shape compared to when he was competing, and in my opinion, that's okay. Keenan accomplished so much in his career and now captured the attention of the jiu-jitsu world. He can take an early retirement sitting on his growing American jiu-jitsu empire as one of the best to ever do it. But another one of the most influential American grapplers actually never put the gi on and has created a massive mystery in his absence. An athlete that paved the way for the modern style that we see today as one of the most feared leg lockers in a period when they weren't so common. Before we get to that, I just want to show off my brand new sweater from xmartial.com. If you haven't heard of X Martial, they've got some of the best and craziest designs for martial arts training gear, and of course, everyday apparel. Go to xmartial.com to check out their rash guards, MMA shorts, streetwear, and even custom gear, because they've got a crazy variety of different designs, including things from pop culture to all over patterns and even just simple stuff. And if you do end up finding something you like and want to support the channel, please use code JOSHJITSU at checkout for 10% off, or just use the link below in my bio. Everyone knows that Danaher Death Squad revolutionized the systematic approach focused on positional control and mechanically finishing submissions, but what's less known is that there's a single competitor that can arguably be considered the athlete that brought Danaher to the mainstream. I'm talking about Eddie Cummings, whose success in 2014 to 2016 popularized the blue basement at Renzo Gracie Academy, because he was undeniably one of the best finishers in the world at that time. The hot streak he produced really turned up in 2015 when Eddie won the US ADCC trials, meaning he would make it to the championships that year in the 66 kilogram division. And what really put him on the map was his finishing streak, where he submitted everybody at the trials, primarily with the terrifying heel hooks that he made his career on. And don't forget, this was at a time when heel hooks really weren't that common to see at these events like they are today. He was one of the pioneers of the leg lock revolution at a time when guys really didn't know how to escape or defend these positions, which made Eddie look on a whole nother level. But his popularity grew exponentially at the Eddie Bravo Invitationals just after the trials that year. Cummings went on to win every match by heel hook at both the 170 and 145 championship, except for one where he lost to his teammate Gary Tonin. But Eddie was super undersized for the 170-pound weight limit to begin with. He would go on to get another heel hook at ADCC Worlds, but lost his second match to the legend Tanquinho to be eliminated from the tournament. But things were just getting started. The very next year, in 2016, he would go on to win 7 more matches, all by submission across EBI 7 at 145 pounds and EBI 10 at 135 pounds, losing only one match in the finals by ride time in overtime. This brought Eddie Cummings' submission rate to 84%, which is pretty much unheard of in the sport. The only guy with the higher rate in 2016 was Gordon Ryan, and then Eddie just vanished. He would only compete 4 times in the next 7 years, with his last match coming in 2019. In one of the last media appearances that Eddie Cummings did back in October of 2019, he still seemed excited about grappling and said he's been growing immensely in his new environment, constantly learning and improving his game. But when the interviewer asked him where he'd been and why he wasn't competing anymore, his answer was a bit vague and convoluted. He said that his lifestyle had changed and that he'd returned to school and he'd been more focused on his studies. Plus now, as he'd gotten older, he started to lose trust in his body to hold up to the stress of competing, while not feeling the drive to sacrifice time and energy to things like dieting, training, and strategizing. But he also suggested that he's had a hard time finding the right opponents that would suit the style of match he's looking for. And it's important to note that this interview took place at Unity Jiu-Jitsu, the new location that Eddie started training since splitting up with Team Renzo Gracie and the Danaher Death Squad. This happened in 2018 after a conflict grew between Eddie and John Danaher. And when John was asked what caused the split, he said that it was due to the fact that some athletes, such as Gary Tonin and Gordon Ryan, are fine with the idea of training with people they will compete against. Others, such as Eddie Cummings, feel awkward about it. And that would make sense, seeing that Renzo Gracie Academy was a hotspot for jiu-jitsu players around the world to visit, especially given that it's in the heart of New York City, one of the best hubs for the sport in the United States. Eddie would no doubt be consistently faced with potential opponents at his home gym if he stayed at Renzo's. But many have speculated that the conflict with John Danaher goes much deeper than that, suggesting that Eddie is upset with the way that John Danaher takes credit for the leg lock system that Eddie himself developed and shared with the team, while John receives all the glory. Gordon Ryan, who's also a member of the DDS and is still to this day, disagrees with this idea that Eddie invented the leg lock system and has even taken to social media to defend John and downplay Eddie's achievements in response to someone saying that Eddie's instructional is better and cheaper. He says, "Pretty sure Eddie has never leg locked a BJJ world champion / ADCC world champion in competition. Myself and Gary have. Secondly, the whole reason we know anything about leg locks is because of John." And according to Reddit, so take this with a grain of salt, he's now got a big time finance job and started dating Anthony Bourdain's widow, Otavia, and the two have pretty well moved on from the sport. Regardless of where the leg lock system originated, I do believe that Eddie played a massive role in sharing the system with the world and greatly influenced today's jiu-jitsu landscape. It's a shame that politics have torn this incredible team apart and maybe the reason that Eddie Cummings disappeared from jiu-jitsu. Now all three of these guys could pop back in a competition at any time, I guess, but it just seems really unlikely to me. Jiu-jitsu is a sport of momentum where you need to string wins together and take training quite seriously to feel confident showing up to a match. Given that all of these guys reach the absolute tippy top of the sport as professional grapplers, they wouldn't really be offered a tune-up match. They'd be thrown right back into the wolves, and that's a difficult thing to gear up for if you're not all in. Do you think we'll see Erberth, Keenan, or Eddie back one day? Let me know down below, and I'll catch you next time.